They called her a thief in front of the man she'd cared for every single day for 3 years. Maria Delgado stood in Walter Hensley's kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd made his oatmeal every morning for 3 years, where she'd measured his blood pressure medication into the little plastic organizer, where she'd laughed with him about his terrible jokes about his late wife's meatloaf, and listened to his son tell her to get out. "We know it was you," Gary said. $47,000 doesn't just disappear. Maria looked at Walter. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "That was 3 weeks ago. This is what happened." Maria hadn't planned on becoming a caregiver. She'd spent 18 years as an office manager at a dental practice before her divorce left her needing steady income and flexible hours to help raise her teenage son. A friend mentioned a Hensley family needed someone reliable. She took the job not knowing it would consume her life in the best and hardest ways. Walter's wife, Eleanor, had passed 8 months earlier, and he was lost in the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself loudly. It just shows up as forgotten meals and unopened mail. Maria gave up weekend plans. She gave up a higher-paying office position she'd been offered 6 months in, because by then she couldn't imagine Walter managing without her. She drove him to cardiology appointments. She learned his medication schedule better than his own doctor's office did. She sat with him on the anniversary of Eleanor's death and let him cry without trying to fix it. It cost her. Her own retirement savings stalled. Her son complained she was never home for dinner, but she told herself it was temporary until Walter got steadier on his feet, figuratively and literally. She didn't expect to still be there 3 years later. She didn't expect any of what came next, either. Walter trusted Maria with things he didn't even tell his son. He told her about the small ache in his chest he hadn't mentioned to his cardiologist. He told her where Eleanor's wedding ring was hidden, in case anything happens to me. He told her more than once that she'd become like family. "You're the only one who actually shows up." He told her one evening, half joking, half not. Derry visited on holidays, mostly. Phone calls were infrequent. That changed about 18 months ago, right around the time Walter, worried about his memory slipping, signed papers making Gary his power of attorney. After that, Gary started coming around more. Maria noticed. She didn't think much of it at first. She was glad father and son were closer. She didn't know yet that closer meant something different to Gary than it did to Walter. The first odd thing was small. Walter mentioned a $400 withdrawal he didn't remember making. Maria assumed it was a forgotten bill, or his memory, which had been declining gently for over a year. Then there was a missed mortgage-adjacent payment on a small rental property Walter still owned, despite him swearing he'd told Gary to handle it months ago. Then Walter, increasingly anxious, started keeping a small notebook. Not the kind of notebook for groceries, the kind where a man jots down dates and dollar amounts because he's starting to doubt his own mind. Maria found one of these notes once, tucked under a coaster. Asked G about the $1,200. He said, "Don't worry about it." She didn't say anything. It wasn't her place. That, she'd realize later, was her first mistake. Not because she owed anyone a confrontation, but because silence let the pattern continue another year. The accusation came on a Tuesday. Gary arrived unannounced with a folder of bank statements and a posture Maria had never seen from him, rehearsed, almost performative. "Gad's accounts are missing almost $50,000 over the last year," he said, not looking at Maria so much as at her, like she was already convicted. "You have access to the house. You handle his cash for groceries and prescriptions." "I handle $40 a week, Gary," Maria said, "not 40,000. Then explained the discrepancy. She couldn't, because she hadn't caused it. But explaining absence of guilt is a strange, helpless thing. There's no document that proves you didn't do something. Walter sat in his recliner, silent, his eyes darting between his son and the woman who'd held his hand through 2 hospital stays. He didn't defend her. He didn't accuse her either. He just looked lost. That silence broke something in Maria more than Gary's accusation did. She was let go that afternoon. No severance, no real explanation beyond the family needs to sort some things out. 3 years, reduced to a locked door and a returned house key. Maria sat in her car outside the house she'd spent 3 years inside of and let herself cry for the first time in longer than she could remember. Her son asked her that night why she looked the way she did. She told him the truth. Someone decided it was easier to blame me than to look closely at themselves. She thought about fighting it, hiring a lawyer, demanding records, defending her name. But she also thought about how exhausting it is to prove a negative, how families protect their own even when their own doesn't deserve it. For 2 weeks, she did nothing. She applied for other caregiving positions and got quiet, polite rejections. Word travels in small caregiving networks, and accused of financial exploitation follows a resume like a stain. Then the bank called. Denise Okafor worked in the fraud department of the bank holding Walter's accounts. Routine monitoring software had flagged a pattern months earlier, recurring transfers, oddly consistent in timing and amount, moving from Walter's account to an account that, on paper, belonged to a household services LLC. It took weeks of internal review before Denise's team escalated it. When she finally pulled the full picture, something didn't add up with the story she'd heard secondhand from Teller, that the family caregiver had been blamed. The caregiver had never had online banking access. She'd never had check signing authority. She had no legal access to that account at all. The only person who did was the power of attorney holder. Denise called Walter's house directly, identifying herself and requesting an in-person meeting, requiring irregular account activity requiring his review. She insisted Walter attend without Gary present, citing standard elder financial protection protocol. It was the first time in over a year that anyone had spoken to Walter about his own money without his son in the room. At the bank, Denise laid out 14 months of transfers, all routed through an LLC registered to Gary's name, all timestamped to align suspiciously with Gary's documented visits and account logins. Walter stared at the papers for a long moment. I thought I was just forgetting things," he said quietly. "He told me I'd authorized things I didn't remember. I believed him. I thought something was wrong with me," Denise said gently. "Mr. Hensley, there's nothing wrong with your memory that explains this. This is a documented pattern, not forgetfulness. It was the kind of sentence that can break a man and free him in the same instant." Walter asked, voice shaking. "Did Maria know about any of this?" Denise reviewed the account access logs again, methodically. She's never had access to this account, not once, not ever. Walter sat with that. The accusation that had cost Maria her job, her reputation, and 3 years of her life had never had a shred of financial basis. It had only ever been convenient. Walter called Gary that evening. The conversation Maria heard about secondhand weeks later was reportedly short. "I know it was you," Walter said, not as an accusation, but as a quiet, exhausted statement of fact. Gary tried to explain a failed business, a balloon payment he couldn't make, a plan to pay it all back before anyone noticed. He said he never meant for it to become this. He said he loved his father. Walter didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Loving me and stealing from me aren't on opposite sides of anything. They happened at the same time. That's what I have to live with now." He contacted an elder law attorney the next morning to begin revoking Gary's power of attorney and reviewing the legality of the LLC transfers with law enforcement involvement. Seemed justice karma. The legal process took months, not days. These things rarely move as fast as anyone wants. Gary's power of attorney was formally revoked. Walter, with Denise's bank documentation and his attorney's guidance, pursued recovery of the misappropriated funds through both civil action and a formal report to his state's Adult Protective Services Unit. Gary faced the financial and legal consequences of 14 months of fund diversion, consequences that, unlike a dramatic courtroom scene, mostly took the unglamorous arm of restitution agreements, legal fees, and a relationship with his father that would take years, if ever, to rebuild. Walter made one more call to Maria. See an emotional ending. Maria almost didn't answer. She didn't recognize the number at first, and some old caution made her hesitate. Maria, Walter said, voice rough, I need to apologize to you. Properly. In person. If you'll let me. She agreed, more out of unresolved feeling than expectation. He told her everything. The bank, Denise, Gary, the documentation, the silence he should have broken 3 weeks earlier when his son first pointed a finger at her instead of himself. And, I knew you, Walter said. 3 years, and I knew exactly who you were. I let fear of losing my son make me forget what I knew about you. I'm sorry. Maria didn't go back to working for the Hensley family. Too much had happened, and some trust, once broken, doesn't fully rebuild even with an apology. But Walter made sure, through his attorney, that her name was formally and explicitly cleared in every record connected to the case. He wrote her a reference letter so specific and so heartfelt that within a month she had 3 job offers from families who'd heard, through the same small caregiving network that once turned her away, that the truth had finally come out. Maria still thinks about those 3 years sometimes, not with bitterness, but with a complicated kind of grief. She loved the work. She loved, in her way, the man she cared for. What she lost wasn't just a job. It was a misplaced trust in the idea that doing the right thing quietly is always enough to protect you. It isn't, always. But sometimes, if you wait long enough, the truth finds its own way to the surface. Walter, for his part, spent his remaining years more cautious, more deliberate, and, by his own account, more honest with himself about the people closest to him. Not because he stopped loving his son, and because he finally understood that love and accountability were never supposed to cancel each other out.